Welcome to Around the Ladder, everyone. I'm Erika Steinberg, and this is the podcast where we talk about how success doesn't always follow a straight line. Imagine that. Most of us grow up with some version of a ladder in mind. You work hard, you keep climbing, and eventually you're going to arrive where you're supposed to be. But real careers are usually a lot messier than that. My guest today is Shabnam Irilian. Shabnam has had a successful and, for a period of time, very linear career. She did everything right, but at a certain point, that path stopped fitting, and she found herself navigating something that a lot of people experience, but we don't always talk about: burnout, uncertainty, the loss of clarity about what comes next. What I really appreciate about Shabnam's story as I've gotten to know her is that it's not presented as a tidy, I figured this all out narrative. It's a much more honest conversation about our ambition, exhaustion, expectations that we all feel, and what happens when the version of success that you've been chasing stops fitting the life that you actually want to lead. So, my fellow eldest daughters, I'm thinking of you as Shabnam and I do dive in here. Welcome, Shabnam, to Around the Ladder. I'm so glad you're here and that we have a chance to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I started listening to you last year and I've been absolutely hooked, so I'm really excited to be here
Oh,
today.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So let's start with your career because you did have this linear career and by all accounts very successful, and then you stepped away from it. So tell me about that path and what was happening at that moment.
Yeah. So it was exactly that. I mean, I thought I was on it. I had my job lined up before I graduated college. I was technically working as an intern for my first company a month before graduation. Like when you talk about a ladder, I was keen, I was motivated because in my mind, it was all about the ladder, right? I didn't necessarily know at the time how far up the ladder I wanted to get. I don't think I even knew necessarily what even the mid-level rungs looked like, but I just knew that there was clarity with like, there's the ladder, just start climbing, go. And so when I look at my career path, I do think I did a pretty good job of staying on the front foot. I was paying attention to what was next. I was aware of when I felt like I had kind of fulfilled a role and was kind of tapped out of it and ready for the next thing. And I kind of always had an eye on like, what do I need to do? How do I need to get promoted? Or what's the next account I can get into? And I was really good at my job, especially in my junior years, like so much so that I would often be brought in to clean up and course correct accounts that had gone sideways, for example. Like I kind of earned this reputation unofficially as a fixer. And I've always had a knack for like marrying the details of the process with building trust and relationships. So if something had gone off the rails, I was a trusted pair of hands who could kind of take care of things and sort of set it right, which did become sometimes frustrating because I'd get something organized, I get so excited to run it, and they were like, "Oh, can you just come over here and look after this thing now?" And so it was an interesting like dichotomy there, I think. And over the years, I've been able to work on a lot of really cool stuff. Being in media marketing for about 20 years,
Mhm.
I've been able to support companies with their brand building, with their storytelling, and like I mean, like when you think about like climbing the ladder and like what different things of success are perceived to look like, I got to work with really cool companies like Apple and Nike and Netflix and Expedia. I've worked with tons of entertainment companies and studios, automotive, retail, small businesses, you name it. It really has been exciting. And as I progressed as a leader, I found, I really enjoyed shaping the operational structure of a business and the operational structure of a team. So I got to a place in my career where I was really enjoying like connecting the dots and leading teams and doing the business development piece and really finding successes in that like cross-functional collaboration, mentorship, coaching, and bringing together like communication strategies and operational strategies and helping the companies I was in drive success as they evolved. And I absolutely love that. And so for some 20 odd years, you know, I was thoroughly enjoying that. And I just had so many different iterations of being exhausted, feeling
So
over
many
it,
levels.
so many levels. It was like I was exhausted, I was over it, I was frustrated. And there were so many times where I would just let myself be consumed by it. And frankly, like my work was such a major point of my identity. It was a point of pride, but it was this all-consuming thing where I felt like I didn't have any other option. And it was, this is what I did, this is what I had to do, what have you. And I never really understood how to fully let myself explore, how to be open to like what else is out there. So I'd be like thriving and driving success and doing all these great things for my companies and my clients, but like continually, like there was this like low key, like I just have a lot of terrible feelings I'm bearing feeling. Um, but yeah, sort of stepping away from that was a really interesting thing, and it was something that I'd been aching to do for months, if not years. And if I'm honest, before it finally happened, it felt like this long, very long build that I had that feeling of like, oh, I just can't make this change. There's all these reasons why. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
What did
bit
it
of a,
feel
yeah.
like then? Like you step off this path. So what did it feel like to suddenly not be on that path anymore and not be climbing this ladder that you had set up?
Yeah. I think when it happened, it felt to me like this culmination of everything, like years of trying to carry all the things and make it seem as if I was happy with it all. Um, but at the end of the day, I think everybody has a breaking point.
Yeah.
And it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but I would kind of joke. I'd say, "Oh, I burnt out so many times," and as if it was a badge of honor, but it wasn't. It was just a way of trying to just joke about a thing that I actually was really uncomfortable with. But not being on that path was really one of the hardest moments of my career. And at the same time, it was one of the moments of greatest clarity that finally, like, yes, okay, yes, I'm doing it, it's happening. There was just a part of me that had been fighting for so long. And I had been really longing for real and genuine change. So I was terrified, especially in the moment. I was absolutely
Of course.
terrified. But at my core, I felt this very innate sense of peace that I was finally doing the thing that needed to happen, that I should have done months or frankly, probably years prior. But it was just like this very core feeling of like, I can breathe. And that was, I don't think I expected how much I would feel that. But
Hmm.
like, even though on the surface it was like, oh no, I'm not sure I actually want to be doing this. I don't know. But actually on the inside, I was like, no, but this is good. This is what you need to be doing. This is like, you're happy with this. And that was a really nice feeling to have.
That's so interesting that you say that because I remember when I started my business, I had the idea for it probably 4 months after I stopped at my last in-house firm, and I met with my old boss and we went over, we were spitballing, we came up with the name together, everything, and he was like, "You have to do this." And I wasn't ready yet. I needed some more time because I was also, when I was honest with myself, I realized I'm completely burned out. I was getting headaches all the time. I was getting sick all the time. And, like you can only ignore it for so long.
Mhm.
But I remember when I was ready, I literally felt it like in the core of my being
Mm.
that this feeling like, okay, this is it. You're ready. This is the time. And it
Yeah.
was it was like a physical sensation.
Yeah, I agree. It's a physical, it's like a very visceral feeling.
Yeah.
And for me, it was just almost, it's almost like in a way, like this existential like moment of realization of like, this is the path. This is almost very Mandalorian. This is the way, it's going to be okay. And yeah, it was neat. It was so desperately needed that it just, I remember in the moments after I fully made that decision, I felt calm.
Yeah.
It wasn't panic. It was like, oh no, what am I going to do? There were elements of that
Yeah.
naturally, but it was calm. It was a
Yeah.
calm I hadn't felt. It was like a relief.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You reminded me of my favorite Mandalorian line. When the first season came out, I was walking around to my kids saying all the time, "I have spoken," and then I would walk away.
Good one. I need to employ that, I think, at home.
I was like, "I have spoken." End of story. So,
Nice.
and speaking of that, I remember when we first talked, you said something very powerful to me, and it stayed with me. And it was about burnout. And you said that burnout is often tied to the stories that we tell ourselves. So, what do you think were the stories that you were carrying?
Gosh, I think it was, you know, I truly believed that working hard would be the key to my success. Being dedicated, being trustworthy, being reliable, being really good at my job. And so that meant that everything would pay off. Um, if I look back, to like 2008, 2009, I was in very early days in my career then. And, a bunch of colleagues and I, we were, in our other offices were being laid off. And there was a bunch of us that were 20, early to mid 20s somethings. And we were in our office, and we were just a group of young people working till 10 or 11 p.m., telling ourselves, well, we're so lucky to have a job. Look at our colleagues. They've all been laid off. We're so lucky to have a job in this climate. We should just be grateful. And grateful is it was just really dangerous the way we were using that.
Mhm.
It wasn't helpful at the time that gratitude became a reason not to ask for more, right? I think it was perfectly fine and actually a really good thing to feel gratitude for having stability in a difficult time, and especially a difficult economic time. But it sort of became the justification for not making change in those early days. And I think when you're deep in it, when you're in denial, it's easier to tell yourself that something else is a problem, right? And then I would tell myself, oh, there's a problem over there, I need to go fix it. So rather than dealing with the core issue, sort of distracting myself with those things.
Yeah.
And for me, I think that solutions piece was enough of a dopamine hit over and over again that I just focused on trying to fix things. And I just focused on, oh, I can help with this, no, I can help with that, as if that would fix whatever the situation was that I was unhappy with.
Yeah. And so then when did you start realizing that all of these stories that you're telling yourself are probably not even true?
I mean, I drank the Kool-Aid like you wouldn't believe. And I can be pretty persuasive with others. I think something that I've, had a knack for, or been told I have a knack for, is like being able to kind of get people on side in really challenging situations. But I was not doing that with myself. I had myself completely fooled. And there were a lot of instances where it was like a TV glitch. Like, do you remember like old TVs kind of go wonky for a second, then come back, or
Yeah.
like changing channels like on the dial?
Mhm.
Or if you've ever seen the show WandaVision, right?
Yes.
Watch that show where like she's walking around and all of a sudden things would just appear that made no sense at all. And she would just keep trying to control it and control it and control it. And I felt that was me. I was just like, oh, that's weird. Let me just tidy that up and pretend it's normal. That's strange. And so I finally started to see those things. I finally started to hear myself in a different way and the things I was saying out loud, and having this like inner monologue of, why am I doing this? Why am I bothering with this? Or I'd be on a call with someone I was maybe collaborating with on a project, or, something, and or even in a presentation where I was loving the results and I was proud of what we were presenting. But in my mind, I was like screaming, just being like, oh, are we done here yet? Like, I'm so over this. And this like really interesting kind of friction in that way.
Mhm.
And I think one of the most recent things that really tipped me over the edge when I realized those stories were not true was actually fairly recent. So ironically for me, I left my most recent in-house role in 2020, April 25. And ironically, 2024 was one of the best years of my career by the numbers. Like, it was one of my deemed to be one of my most successful years I'd ever experienced. I was super proud of the work I was doing. I was super proud of my teams. I had the most incredible teams. I had a client experiences I was really happy with. And I was absolutely miserable. I'd been traveling a ton. I was working late most nights of the week. And my little one wasn't even two. So layer on life, not just work things. And I was basically circling the drain, living in this like drama triangle in a way. And I just couldn't see the wood from the trees. And I was trying to do all these things and that I thought were keys to being successful, but I was just kind of actually failing at all of them. And I recognized like success shouldn't feel this way. This shouldn't be such a great year, but also I feel so terrible. And so I had already been feeling it for some time, but especially by the end of that year, I knew I needed to make a change.
Yeah. I remember one of the things that you and I talked about was the fact that we're both eldest daughters and what that means. I had a conversation with someone for a different episode of Around the Ladder who's a therapist that I hope did not devolve into, okay, this is a therapy session for Erica, but it may have a little bit, but that's okay. But you also described yourself as a high performing first generation eldest daughter. So you've got first generation and eldest daughter. You've got a double whammy on you. But how did that shape the way you approached your own thoughts and your own feelings about work and success?
Mm. Yes. I mean, I think to kind of go back a little bit, my parents immigrated here for college and they met when they were in school, and then they went on to build a life literally from nothing. So I understood very early on a certain type of hustle and work ethic. I think what that instilled in me also from them was this innate focus on loyalty, dedication, and hard work. And I think it's all kind of rooted in the concept that our hard work pays off and our hard work is rewarded. Um, you know, my parents were, had me when they were pretty young, and they were still learning so much that even when I was a kid, like, and I was around them and their friends mostly, but in a way, I was both the child and the peer because we were learning so many similar things, especially like
Yeah.
schooling and culturally, kind of growing up. So as they were building their lives and raising me, I was sort of alongside them in many ways as well, which I think a lot of first generation eldest daughters experience. Um, and my parents are absolutely incredible. I was in junior high and my mom went back to school with two kids, took on a double course load and still made the dean's list. And along the way, I was helping proofread her college papers,
Oh my
right?
goodness.
And not that she needed it, but like that was sort of the stage she was in. And like now I don't look at anything for her ever when it comes to proofreading anything. If anything, we're collaborating more on like her strategy and her like her, plans as she goes to market, with her business. But that was just a part of what it looked like at the time. And my brother and I are almost 8 years apart. So when my parents, they did a great job of showing us what teamwork looks like. And part of my responsibilities just happened to include looking after him in ways when he was younger, right? So in essence, sort of carrying some of those larger responsibilities as the big sister. But my parents, gosh, my parents helped everybody. Like if anyone literally needed anything, my parents were the first ones there. And so this idea of being a helper, being a supporter and making a positive impact in any way, like large or small, like that was ingrained in me really early, which I'm really grateful for. And, I think we're a family of empaths, frankly. So I also learned from them how to really tune into people. I think that really helped me in my career, like how to see through what was on the surface and hear not just what people were saying, but like what they weren't saying and ways to kind of genuinely support people in a different way than just, what the checklist said, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Well, part of that of being able to tune into people is also being able to put some kind of filter up so that you don't absorb everything from people. So
Yes.
that's yeah.
Yeah. And it
It's
was
it's
really
it's
key.
good to have one, but you also need to have the other one so you don't end up absorbing too much from
Mhm. Yeah,
others.
completely. Completely. And I mean, in so many ways, I learned from them like how to build trust and being able to walk into rooms without feeling intimidated by senior people or clients. You know what I mean? Like I felt really comfortable being myself. I felt comfortable asking questions, even when like my peers were nervous to and things like that. But yeah, that filter, I almost kept too strong of a filter on, I think, in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes that having that drive, it can serve us well. There are certainly things that, you get really far in your career. I remember, by the time I hit 30, I was already director of marketing and business development at a law firm, at a big law firm. And I didn't even, I think back to that now. I was like, I was 30 years old and it didn't happen by accident. So that drive can really serve you well, but then you also have to watch the flip side of it, that it doesn't cost you, which,
100%.
yeah. Yeah.
100%.
So I was also thinking back to something from that you said the last time we talked. Uh, and I'm still not sure what this means, so I want to ask you again that the goal isn't necessarily, well, I know what it means, but I still want to hear it from you. The goal isn't necessarily a job anymore, but full time income. So I wanted to talk about what that shift means for you.
Yes. I think for me, having this realization that full-time income for me is really about this idea of a portfolio of income. So approaching my work in a really different way, not and having it not just be from a singular source. I think the idea that that portfolio is comprised of things that I want to be doing, right? That I feel like I am able to choose more. And so it can still be work for work's sake if I decide that's what I want to do. I mean, at the end of the day, not everything is going to be this like massively amazing, fulfilling moment of like the angels start singing. It's not always going to be that, and that's fine. Um, but it can also be passion projects, and it can be leaning into creativity and teaching opportunities and so on. So that really started to come on for me, I would say about 6 months out from when I stepped away. And I basically left in the first week of April last year. So I don't know if you recall what was happening around then. But that was right when all of the tariff news was coming out, the stock market was
Yes.
going crazy, the economy was just flipping on its head that particular week. And so the timing of when I left wasn't really ideal. It helped that I just knew I needed this career break. And so I gave myself this really intentional space and like thankfully I had a little bit of runway to do so. But it was interesting as I started to look for what was next. I started realizing that I would get this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach when I was trying to network with certain people or reach out to certain companies or even applying for certain roles. Like even just thinking about it now, I'm like short of breath. Um, but steps that were logically the right path that I would typically take just made me feel awful. It was like this fear, this anxiety, and there was a really disruptive feeling
Yeah.
that kept blocking me because I was so frustrated. I'm like, I am a whole person. Like I am a whole adult. I'm strong. I can push through things. I can persevere. Like, why am I not just doing this? I could have made this phone call weeks ago, right? And I realized I don't actually want that. I don't actually want that thing. I don't want to speak to that person because it's going to lead to me to an experience that I've had, and I don't want to have that experience again. Um, and it was this realization that what I had been going through for so long hadn't actually been serving me the way I had been telling myself it was serving me, or that I just wasn't listening to myself about it. And in taking on this idea of a portfolio of income, having more of that choice and having that discernment and ability to shape it the way I want to shape it is really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And because it's doable, it's completely possible.
Yeah. It sounds so freeing. I mean, it can be unsettling, but
Mhm.
it's also very freeing.
Yeah, I mean, it's naturally unsettling for sure, just because,
Yeah.
I mean, moments of change are challenging, but it was 100% freeing. I think even in moments where I was like, on the one hand, I was saying for years, I'm like, I want to start serving on boards. I want to set up my consulting practice. I want to be a professor at universities. I want to do this. I want to have all these things that I want to do. And I just never was prioritizing what I wanted because I was putting in everything had to give, I was putting into everything else,
Hmm.
work-wise, life-wise. And so it's been this really interesting period of time where I was finally letting myself focus on what I wanted. And when I would speak to people, I'd be like, I'm using this time to think about and focus on things I wanted to do a long time, and this thing, and this thing, and this thing. And the most lovely thing actually happened, when I was speaking to a woman who I know, and, we were catching up. I was sharing with her what the latest was and hearing what she was up to. And I sort of shared with her, yeah, this is kind of some of the things I'm thinking about. And she was like, really? She's like, if you're looking for a board role, I'm on a board and we're looking to add some new people and I think you'd be really great. Like, why don't you look into the organization if you're interested? We'll like make the connections and start the process. And I was just like taken aback. And then here you go. 2 months later, I began serving on the board for the Los Angeles Education Partnership, which I absolutely love doing. So like, whether board work, advisory work, consultancy, teaching, I've got a little design studio side hustle now, like whatever those different things are and end up being over time. Ultimately, I want to be able to build my life in a way that I can do the things I'm enjoying. And especially as a mother of two girls, I want to be able to say to my children, look at all of the different ways that we can define success. And that's really huge for me. I wasn't showing up for myself and I wasn't showing up for them. And I think now that's not even a question anymore, those two things.
Yeah. Yeah. And what they're going to see from you and learn from just watching you and observing and
Hmm.
absorbing it is going to change the trajectory for them,
Hmm.
really, which is that's a big deal. I mean, that's a you can't it's very hard to learn something if you haven't seen it yourself. So, yeah.
Completely.
So how does it feel now? Or really, how do you make decisions now? How does it feel? I don't know, one or both. Now that you don't necessarily have this very clearly defined path, like you don't have rungs on the ladder that you're following. Instead, you're kind of saying, "Oh, I'm going to step over here and then I'll step over there." How does that feel?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind is that I don't think we ever necessarily know what the latter is inclusive of anyway. Like nobody says, unless you can be at a company and they can say, well, these are all the titles. Here's the titles in the department. And based on what you're doing, this is your next step because you've come here and this is the path we
Hmm.
show you. Um, but I think the thing that really came to mind for me was like, it's kind of what I talked to my 8-year-old about if she's having a big reaction before she knows the full story of something, right? She's heard a snippet and she's like kind of getting really upset and losing it. I just sort of try to get her to pause and I say, do we know all the information? And right there, that's what I've been doing for myself is like, okay, if I feel stuck, do I know everything I feel like I need to know right now? What do I know? What do I not know? If there's stuff I need to know, how do I get it? And so most of the time, it's just info gathering. And sometimes that's tapping into my network, whether it's research or tapping into my network or dropping a line on Slack into a Slack community I'm in, or picking up the phone and just asking people, I'm trying to figure out X. Have you run into this? And I found that to just be a really nice reframe for myself to say, hold on, this doesn't need to be this hard. Maybe I can just get more information and make a better decision from there.
Yeah. Yeah, that I mean, basically, I was at a conference recently and there was a great session about building your personal board of directors. And
Mm.
what you described was exactly what the people who were on the panel were talking about was, reaching out to their network, figuring out where the gaps were, where they needed more information. I remember that one of the things you said in the past was that there's not really a how-to guide for this stage of life and career, especially for women, for men either. But like there's not a how-to guide. So, there's these parts that are missing from the conversation. I don't know what those parts are. Do you have any sense of like what's missing from this stage?
I have many thoughts. I have many thoughts, all these types of things. Honestly, I mean, I think as it pertains to what we're talking about here, I think critically there's two things. I think one, women are not taught how to pivot in our careers. And I also think that women are often not pulled out of an unhealthy cycle in the workplace by someone who sees it. And so these are things that we end up figuring out almost entirely on our own as we progress. Hopefully we figure it out, or we end up finding like whatever our coping mechanisms are in those moments and for those situations. I mean, I have a few things that I think about, looking back. I remember very early on, I was maybe 2 years into working. I decided to move to a company that operated in a pretty niche part of the industry that I was already in. And the woman who oversaw the team I was on, she probably had 30 years on me. And she pulled me into her office after I'd resigned and really kindly encouraged me not to specialize too early. And in truth, like there have been so many times over the years where I wish I'd listened to her because she was right. I specialized really early, and that made it more difficult when I was trying to make more broad moves in the earlier years of my career. Um, and so I think that that the way she approached that was absolutely lovely. I just don't think it happens very often. If anything, it was like, how could I lean into this? Like, I want to go do this thing. I'm not getting what's serving me here. I want to go do this thing. Um, and interestingly, in another moment early in my career, I had a client, I was probably 5, 6, 7 years in, probably 7 years in or something like that. One of my largest clients told me he was leaving his role. And he shared the job posting with me. And he actually encouraged me to go for it. And I was like, well, there's no reason not to. Like, that could be a nice change. Like, I'm kind of ready for change. I'm ready to figure out like a new thing. And I spoke with his bosses and interviewed for the role. And I was really, really proud of myself for taking a positive step. And also, I felt like I was being really professional and having discretion and all that. About a week later, my bosses had caught wind of it, and I was written up for it. I was written up for applying for a job that was publicly posted, that was fair game and open for everyone. And the piece that really gets me there is even now, I never received any guidance on what I could have or should have done differently. That would have taught me something. It would have given me something to then pass down to others. It was just this massive miss. And they could have provided me with that guidance of like, here's how it's done. And I know you really wanted to do this, but here's why it was a problem. None of that. It was like I'd never gotten written up for a thing in my life until that point. And, to this day, anytime I tell the story, no one I speak to ever suggests what the right way of doing that would have been. Like nobody really has that answer because they're so shocked at what happened in that
Yeah.
moment.
Well, probably because what you did was the right way. So,
I don't disagree with you.
of course not.
Like why go, I think in that moment, my thought process was, well, why am I going to go to my boss if I don't even know if they're going to consider me for this?
Yeah.
Let me go have a conversation and see what happens. And if they show interest, then I'll go and say, hey, I'm going to go interview for this role. I think it's important that you know. But if they're like, thanks, but no thanks, I'm not gonna
Yeah. What's the
not
point?
gonna embark on that discussion, right? And so I think there's, the other thing comes to mind, I think, on this one is that as women especially, we generally take on so much. That's like a life thing that we do. And in the workplace, everyone lets us. It
Yes.
doesn't matter the gender identity even, right? Like people, male, female, however you identify, like everybody will let you take on whatever you sign up for. And I think what's really important to note here is that burnout at work comes from either not pulling yourself out of or not being pulled out of an unhealthy cycle. And I remember I was in the UK and I was switching companies, and there's this lovely nonprofit there called NABS who support the advertising industry. And I remember going in and while I was making this change from one company to the other and speaking with a coach that they had there. And all I could say over and over again was, the way I am working is not sustainable. The way I am working is not sustainable. I didn't know what the answer was. I didn't know how to get to the bottom of it. I just knew that I was really struggling and something had to shift. But here I was going over to a new company. I just knew I couldn't continue. So oftentimes we need somebody to help us unpick how we got there, put new habits in place. But a lot of times it's just sort of calling out like, hey, I see you and I see that this isn't working. And then helping figure out what support looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I guess somewhere in there, I was aware of that in my past life. With my company now, I have regular meetings with everybody on the team, and I always ask, are you okay with the workload? How are you
Mhm.
feeling? Or if I know something is coming up for somebody, tell me what we need to do to shift things around so that you're okay. Because I have been burned out, and you're right. People don't always recognize it, and also we don't always show it. We try not to show it.
Right.
So
Right. And that's where I think, especially when folks are really junior in their careers, it's it's so important that somebody comes in and kind of tells you and gives you the direction, right? And
mhm.
says, hey, you're staying too late in the office. Let's figure out how we get you out sooner. This isn't necessary for the business to be successful, right? Stop replying to emails after you leave the office. It's not that important, right? And when you do X, you're allowing another person to take credit for your work, for example. And I think so much of these like little things that lead to burnout over time can be addressed on the front end, right? Like setting clearer, fairer expectations. Like I think how we, especially when folks are really junior in their careers, how we teach people to manage their workload, how we teach people to manage expectations with clients, with internal stakeholders, with, managing up to their bosses. These are skills that often don't don't end up getting taught, or I should say don't end up getting learned until you run into the conflict of it, right? Whatever that looks like for you. And I think there's so much that can be done to teach folks how to communicate around different topics internally and externally. And instead, when that communication or that guidance is lacking, junior folks are working on assumptions and the fear of the unknown and getting it wrong. And that just starts a dangerous cycle.
Yeah, yeah. So now you've gone through this tremendous change in your career. What kinds of things are you doing differently? Like, what are your non-negotiables now, also?
Yeah, I think it's just been such an interesting process that it's even more clear than I think it was. Like it's critical that I work in alignment with my values and that I not be working in a situation that just doesn't feel right, that becomes a drain on me and my time. I ran into a project last year. I was trying to kick off doing some consulting work and it was exactly that. It started to become a drain on my time. And I realized, hold on here, I have agency in this. And I can tell them this isn't how I want to work. This isn't how I'm going to work. I'm here for you. And I'm not being valued. And I'm not being, I don't like the way that we're going about this. So I can respectfully decline, being a part of something. And I really am trying to focus on prioritizing time for myself, whatever shape that takes in a particular day. I really learned through all of this that what it means to pour from an empty cup. So I'm trying to be really intentional about doing things to keep it full. And that can be something small that just makes me feel good. Nobody else even needs to know about it.
Hmm.
Or it can be something that's sort of more openly, clearly a thing for me. And I think that the last non-negotiable for me is my kids. They should only feel the benefits of the work I do they should get the best possible version of me that I can give on the day, which is not perfect, but it my work should not be something that they feel in any sort of negative context.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always a big one. So I'm coming down to my last question now. If someone listening is stuck in this cycle that you've gone through right now, the overperforming, being burned out, maybe not even fully aware of it yet, what would you want that person to hear?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I feel like we could sit here and do a whole podcast just on this. Um,
You'll have to come back then.
there we go. I think when you're not fully aware of it, I would say it's not supposed to feel this hard, right? Challenges are a normal thing, like learning and breaking through adversity and working through friction. There's normal amounts of that, but it's just not supposed to feel this hard. I'd also say stop giving more to a company than you do to yourself. I think there are some hard truths that we come across, but we don't necessarily want to admit to ourselves sometimes. And the reality is that things don't go both ways. What you give to a company is never going to be what they give to you. And so that's just part of the structure of business. I had a great professor in college who taught us some really helpful, like real life application components. And one of the things he said to us, and I've used this most of my career with folks in my teams as well, is, we need to understand that everybody is replaceable. And understanding that we are individually replaceable is actually really healthy to understand, right? Like if I leave tomorrow, somebody else will do the job. Somebody else will get it done. I might have an opinion about the quality of that work based on my perceptions and my beliefs, but understanding and accepting that actually puts you in more control if you lean into what that looks like. And I think I would just say to folks, like, get networking. Start spending time with people outside of your day to day. And it doesn't have to be this big, intense agenda or complaining about what's going on in your work life. Just schedule 30-minute hangouts and it helps you get out of your head, which is a wonderful thing. And if you're feeling, really deep in it, whenever you're open to it, opportunities will start to come your way just simply based on the fact that you've been talking to people and they get to know you and it's you who they want and the rest can be taught. And lastly, I'd say it's okay to let a ball drop because sometimes it really has to.
We had a whole conversation like that before we even started recording today.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can make a mistake and it actually turns out even better.
Yeah.
So,
And nobody knows anything's actually wrong sometimes. Like the business won't typically understand it from a fiscal perspective.
yeah,
If a ball doesn't drop, nothing's at risk, so there's nothing to fix. And so
yep,
sometimes you have to let the ball drop in order to affect change,
yeah.
which I never would have admitted 20 years ago.
That's okay. That's the benefit of age. That's the
Mm,
benefit of those 20 years of experience. So,
definitely.
oh my goodness. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation so openly and so honestly. It reminds me that growth also is not one size fits all. Sometimes it looks like slowing down long enough to question whether the path that you're still on is still the right one for you. And I also appreciate that you didn't turn this into this very polished reinvention story. I think that the uncertainty, the rebuilding, the self awareness, that's what makes it meaningful and makes it relatable. So, thank you for sharing your story. And thank you, everyone, for listening. This is Around the Ladder, where we explore the paths that don't always follow the traditional climb. Remember, there is no one right way up. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with some other people who you think might enjoy it as well. Thank you.